I've been driving long-haul routes for close to 15 years now, mostly cutting through the desolate desert highways of Nevada, Utah, and Arizona. When you spend that much time isolated in a metal cabin, watching nothing but white lines get swallowed by the black asphalt under the glow of your high beams, your mind starts to play tricks on you. You learn to embrace the loneliness, but you also learn that the desert has a dark side, secrets that only reveal themselves to the tired eyes of night shift truckers after 3 a.m. It was mid-October, right around the time the desert nights turn from uncomfortably warm to bitterly freezing. I was hauling a massive, heavy load of structural steel from Salt Lake City down to a construction site just outside of Reno, Nevada. It was a route I had driven dozens of times before, mostly via Interstate 80. But because of a massive fuel tanker accident that had shut down the main interstate for at least 12 hours, dispatch routed me onto an old, 2-lane state highway that cut straight through the heart of the empty wilderness. This road didn't have gas stations every 20 miles. It didn't have cellular towers. It was just a cracked, uneven ribbon of black asphalt surrounded by miles of jagged rocks, low sagebrush, and absolute, crushing darkness. By the time I hit the halfway mark, it was roughly 3:15 a.m. The initial rush of caffeine from my thermos had completely worn off, leaving behind a heavy, burning exhaustion behind my eyes. The only sound inside the cabin was the steady, hypnotic rumble of my 18-wheeler's engine and the faint, rhythmic clicking of the dashboard clock. I was desperately looking for a wide dirt turnout or an old abandoned lot where I could safely pull over, set the air brakes, and close my eyes for an hour. But the shoulders of this particular highway were incredibly narrow, dropping off into deep rocky ditches on both sides. Driving an 80,000-pound rig into one of those meant flipping the trailer and getting stranded in the middle of nowhere. So, I had no choice but to keep pushing forward, my high beams cutting through the eerie, empty blackness. Up ahead, about a half-mile away, I noticed a strange flicker of light on the right side of the road. As the truck closed the distance, the shape became clearer. It wasn't a standard highway sign or a broken-down vehicle. It was an old, dilapidated gas station from the 1960s. The building was completely ruined. The DI roof had partially collapsed. The windows were shattered into jagged teeth, and the old fuel pumps were rusted into hollow metal skeletons. But remarkably, one single overhead fluorescent light fixture above the old garage bay was functioning, flickering violently with a high-pitched, buzzing hum that I could hear even over the sound of my engine. More importantly, there was a wide, flat concrete apron in front of the ruins. It was the perfect spot to park. Relieved, I slowed the massive truck down, turned the steering wheel, and pulled the rig onto the cracked concrete, parking parallel to the dark highway. I left the running lights on, pulled the yellow air brake knob, which filled the cabin with a loud, satisfying hiss, and let out a deep breath. I leaned my head back against the seat, closing my eyes, letting the vibration of the idling diesel engine soothe my aching muscles. I must have drifted off for about 10 minutes when a sudden, sharp static burst from my CB radio snapped me wide awake. Crackle. Shh. I blinked heavily, looking at the small green screen of the radio unit mounted above my head. The volume was turned down low, but the static was incredibly loud, indicating a very close transmitter. I reached up to turn it off, assuming it was just atmospheric interference from the desert hills. But before my fingers could touch the knob, a voice broke through the white noise. It wasn't the typical gruff, friendly voice of a fellow trucker. It was soft, incredibly slow, and completely devoid of any emotion. It sounded like someone reading words off a page without understanding what they meant. Truck parked at the pumps. Blue cab, trailer number 479. My hand froze in midair. A cold, heavy wave of dread immediately dropped into the pit of my stomach. My truck had a deep blue cabin, and the small white stencil on the side of my silver trailer read exactly that. 479. Someone was watching me. I looked out my left window toward the highway. Total blackness. I looked through my windshield at the collapsed gas station structure bathed in the flickering fluorescent light. There were no cars parked anywhere. There was no cover, no trees, no fences. Just flat desert for miles. Where could anyone be? Hiding close enough to read the small numbers on the side of my trailer in the dark. I grabbed the microphone, my knuckles instantly turning white. This is Big Blue. Who is this? If you're playing a joke. It ain't funny, driver. I'm tired and I don't want any trouble. Over. There was no immediate response. Just the heavy, rhythmic hiss of static. Shh. Shh. I stared intently into my side mirrors, trying to scan the darkness behind the trailer. Nothing. But then, the radio crackled again. The voice was slightly louder this time, but still completely flat, like a voice generator. The driver is awake. He is looking in the mirrors. He is afraid. My breath caught in my throat. My heart began to hammer violently against my ribs, the sound echoing in my ears. This person wasn't just close. They had a direct, unobstructed line of sight into my cabin. They could see my head moving. I reached up and frantically flipped the switch to turn on my incredibly bright, roof-mounted off-road spot lamps. The powerful white beams exploded into the night, illuminating the entire perimeter of the old gas station with blinding clarity. What I saw made my blood instantly run cold. Inside the ruined garage bay of the gas station, directly underneath the flickering fluorescent light, was an old wooden chair. Sitting in that chair was a man. He was wearing a plain, completely clean gray jumpsuit, but his face was completely hidden behind a crude, oversized wooden mask shaped like a smiling human face. The kind of mask you might see in an old theater troupe, with hollow, empty black circles cut out for the eyes. He was holding a small, handheld CB radio unit in his left lapel, and in his right hand, he was casually holding a long, rusted iron crowbar, tapping it slowly against the concrete floor. Clink, clink, clink. Through the open garage door, his hollow mask was pointed directly at my face. He didn't move. He didn't stand up. He just sat there in the middle of the ruins, miles away from civilization, watching me through the empty eye holes of that wooden smile. Get out of the truck. Driver. The flat voice droned through the CB speaker. Come, look at the face. A wave of pure, primal survival instinct washed over my exhaustion. I didn't say a single word back into the microphone. I dropped the mic onto the floorboard, jammed my foot down on the clutch, and violently pushed the yellow air brake valve back in. The truck groaned as the brakes released. I slammed the transmission into low gear and stomped on the gas pedal. The heavy 18-wheeler roared, the massive tires screaming and spinning against the cracked concrete of the apron as I tried to build momentum. As the truck began to surge forward toward the highway exit, I glanced at my passenger side mirror to make sure my trailer was clearing the rusted ruins. But as the cabin passed the edge of the old brick structure, I realized the man in the chair was no longer there. The wooden chair was empty, overturned on the concrete floor. Suddenly, a loud, terrifying thud echoed from the back of my truck, followed by the metallic screech of tearing aluminum. Bang! Something, or someone, had leaped from the low, collapsed roof of the gas station, structured directly onto the top of my moving trailer. The sheer weight of the impact caused the entire cab to shudder. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I forced the gears up, shifting rapidly as the truck broke onto the main highway, accelerating to 40, 50, then 60 miles per hour into the dark desert night. Through the roof of my cabin, I could hear a frantic, heavy scraping sound, like heavy boots scrambling for grip on the smooth metal surface of the trailer roof, moving slowly toward the front of the rig. Get out, get out, get out. The CB radio began to repeat over and over again, the static growing so intense, the small speaker sounded like it was going to burst. I reached up with a trembling hand and completely ripped the power wires out of the back of the radio unit, plunging the cabin into sudden, heavy silence, except for the roar of the wind and the engine. I kept my foot pinned to the floorboard for 30 minutes straight, pushing the truck to its absolute mechanical limit, ignoring the warning lights flashing on my dashboard. Finally, in the far distance, the bright, welcoming neon lights of a massive 24-hour travel plaza appeared on the horizon. The security guards shone their heavy flashlights up onto the roof. The man was gone, likely having jumped off when the truck slowed down near the town limits. But right at the very edge of the roof, directly above my driver's side cabin door, the thick aluminum sheeting had been violently peeled back and hacked away. Embedded deep into the metal structure, holding a small piece of torn gray fabric, was a rusted iron crowbar. If I had stayed at that abandoned gas station for even one more minute, or if I had slowed down on that dark highway, that wooden masked figure would have broken through the roof of my cab while I was driving. I finished that delivery, but the next morning, I handed my keys back to the dispatcher. I refuse to drive any route that cuts through the empty interior highways of Nevada. Some roads belong to things that don't want us there. And I am not going back to find out what's behind that wooden smile. I've been driving night shifts for close to 6 years now, mostly hauling heavy dry goods across the vast, empty stretches of the American Midwest. If you've ever driven through western Kansas or Nebraska at 3 in the morning, you already know what it feels like. It's just an endless, suffocating blackness. No city lights, no trees, just infinite cornfields stretching out into the dark, and the hypnotic steady hum of your own diesel engine. It gets incredibly lonely out there, which is why most long-haul truckers rely heavily on the CB radio just to hear a human voice and keep themselves from falling asleep at the wheel. It was a miserable, rainy Tuesday night on Interstate 70. The rain wasn't a heavy downpour, but a thick, freezing mist that coated the windshield, forcing my wipers into a slow, rhythmic drag. The road was completely dead. I hadn't seen another pair of headlights in over 40 miles. I was pushing through a heavy wave of drowsiness, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the steering wheel, trying to force myself to stay focused. Suddenly, the static on my CB radio crackled to life, breaking the heavy silence inside the cabin. Crackle. Shh. Any eastbound drivers on the 70? Do you copy? Over. A raspy, gravelly voice asked through the small speaker. I picked up the microphone, glad to have a distraction. Yeah, this is Big Blue heading east, just past mile marker 1 to 14. Road is completely clear but wet. What's your handle, driver? Over. There was a long, uncomfortable pause. Nothing but the heavy hiss of static filled the airwaves. I figured the driver had dropped connection or moved out of range due to the storm. But just as I went to hang the mic back on its dashboard clip, the voice came back. It was much lower this time, almost dropping to a harsh whisper. Big Blue, You might want to check your sleeper berth. There was a man standing on your metal steps at the last toll booth. He slipped inside when you stopped. Over. A cold shock of electricity immediately shot straight through my chest, making the hairs on my arms stand up. I glanced instantly at my side mirrors. The freezing mist was blurring the glass, but the side steps looked empty. I forced a nervous laugh into the microphone, trying to convince myself that this was just some bored truck driver playing a cruel psychological prank on a lonely road. Very funny, driver, I replied, my voice shaking just a fraction. My doors are fully locked. Ain't nobody back there. Good try though, over. I am not joking, Big Blue. The voice rasped back instantly, completely deadpan. I was parked at the fuel island right behind you when you pulled out. I watched him. He was wearing tattered wet clothes, and he slipped between your cab and the trailer where the airlines connect. He's inside your sleeper berth, driver. Check your passenger side right now, over. The radio went completely dead, leaving nothing but a cold, empty silence in the cabin. I slowly turned my head to look over at the passenger seat. It was completely empty, illuminated only by the dim, eerie green glow of my dashboard instruments. But behind the passenger and driver seats was a heavy, thick black fabric curtain. That curtain led directly to my sleeper berth. The small, cramped bed compartment where I slept during my long cross-country trips. The curtain was completely drawn shut. Suddenly, the air inside the truck felt suffocatingly tight. My heart was pounding so hard against my ribs, I could feel it in my throat. I tried to tell myself again that it was a prank. The locks on my doors were heavy, and I always locked them. But then, a terrifying thought hit me. At the last toll booth, I had rolled down my window halfway to pay the attendant, and I had left the truck idling for about 2 minutes while I checked a loose strap on my flatbed. Could someone have slipped through the passenger door in the dark? I stared at the black curtain in my rearview mirror. My eyes widened as I noticed something that made my blood freeze solid. The heavy fabric of the sleeper curtain slowly shifted. It wasn't a sudden, violent movement. It was a slow, deliberate pressure from the inside, as if someone hiding inside the dark bed compartment was leaning their weight against the cloth, shifting their position to get closer to the front seats. I couldn't breathe. I was driving an 80,000-pound vehicle at 70 miles per hour down a wet, slippery highway in the middle of nowhere, and I was trapped in a locked metal box with a potentially dangerous stranger hiding inches behind my head. I couldn't just slam on the brakes on a wet interstate. The massive trailer would jackknife, flipping the truck and leaving me completely helpless. I had to act completely natural. I kept my eyes locked on the dark road ahead, but my ears were straining, trying to hear any sound over the loud roar of the engine. Then, during a brief moment when the tires went silent over a smooth patch of asphalt, I heard it. A faint, wet, ragged breath coming from directly behind the heavy black curtain. Along with the sound, a sudden pungent stench filled the small cabin. It was an overwhelming, sickening smell of rotting wood, stale river water, and wet mud. It smelled like someone who had been living out in the swamps for months. I knew I couldn't wait for the next official rest stop. According to my GPS, that was at least 20 miles away. I would be dead by then if whoever was back there decided to move. But I remembered seeing a small gravel turnout used by highway patrol cars. About a half-mile ahead, I flipped my turn signal, pretending I was just changing lanes or pulling over for a routine check. As the truck slowed down, rolling onto the gravel shoulder at about 10 miles per hour, I didn't even bother to set the parking brakes fully. The moment the tires touched the dirt, I jammed the transmission into neutral, unlocked my driver's side door, and threw myself out into the pouring rain. I hit the wet gravel hard, scraping my arms and rolling over twice into the mud. But my adrenaline was pumping so hard, I scrambled to my feet instantly. I pulled a heavy tactical pocket knife from my jeans, backing away from the idling truck into the dark, towering cornfields that lined the highway. Under the bright orange glow of my truck's cabin lights, I watched the passenger side door slowly click open from the inside. A man stepped out onto the metal running board. In the light, I could see he was remarkably thin, his ribs practically pushing through his tattered, mud-soaked clothes. He had no shoes on, and his feet were caked in thick, dark earth. But the most terrifying, unforgettable part of his appearance was his face. He had a massive, unblinking smile stretched across his mouth. A smile so unnaturally wide it looked structurally impossible, as if his cheeks had been physically torn back. He didn't run toward me. He didn't try to attack. He just stood on the steps of my idling truck, completely drenched in the freezing rain, staring directly at me out in the dark field. He slowly raised a single, emaciated hand, his long, dirty fingernails catching the dashboard light, and gave me a slow, mocking wave. Then he turned around and vanished silently into the pitch-black cornfields on the opposite side of the highway. When the state police arrived 30 minutes later, they searched my sleeper berth with flashlights and K9 units. They found a massive pool of stagnant, muddy water soaking through my mattress, and a small, rusted hunting knife left directly on my pillow. Whoever he was, he hadn't slipped in to steal my cargo. He had been waiting back there in the dark for me to find a quiet place to pull over and go to sleep. I don't answer the CB radio anymore, and I never, ever leave my cabin door unlocked, even for a single second. This happened to me exactly last winter on a desolate, forgotten stretch of Highway 20 in northern Nebraska. If you've ever taken that route, you know it's infamous among long-haul truckers for one specific reason. There is absolutely zero cell phone service for stretches of 50 miles or more. If something goes wrong out there, you are completely on your own, trapped between the frozen, empty plains and a sky that looks like heavy black velvet. It was a bitter, cold Monday morning, right around 3:30 a.m. The temperature outside had dropped into the single digits, and a light, freezing powder was starting to swirl across the asphalt, making the road look like it was shifting in the dark. I was driving a standard medium-sized box truck, delivering an urgent shipment of specialized medical supplies to a small rural clinic near the state border. I was pushing the speed limit slightly because the heater in my cab was starting to glitch, and I just wanted to get through the empty plains and get to a warm hotel room. Suddenly, a sharp, blinding flash of red and blue lights illuminated my rearview mirror, completely shattering the darkness inside my cabin. I looked up, squinting against the glare. A dark, unmarked sedan had pulled up directly behind my bumper, its emergency strobe lights flashing with an intense, aggressive rhythm. I let out a heavy sigh, assuming I had been caught by a local sheriff for speeding in a rural zone. I slowly lifted my foot off the accelerator, turned on my hazard lights, and pulled the box truck over to the side of the highway, letting the tires crunch to a halt on the frozen dirt shoulder. I rolled down my driver's side window halfway, allowing the freezing winter air to blast into my face. I pulled out my wallet, grabbed my commercial driver's license, and waited for the officer to approach. The police car had parked about 25 feet behind my rear bumper. Because of the blinding, high-intensity high beams and the chaotic flashing of the strobe lights, I couldn't make out the exact make, model, or license plate of the vehicle. I couldn't even see the silhouette of the person sitting behind the steering wheel. I watched my side mirror intently as the driver's side door of the sedan slowly swung open. A man stepped out into the freezing cold night. But as he walked into the direct beam of my truck's side running lights, a sudden heavy wave of unease hit my chest. My stomach dropped completely. He was wearing a dark navy blue uniform, but it looked entirely wrong. The fabric was incredibly cheap and thin, wrinkled, baggy, and loose, almost like a cheap Halloween costume you'd buy at a discount store. He had a heavy black utility belt strapped around his waist, but instead of a standard police-issue holster, handcuffs, and a radio, a massive, rusted steel machete was strapped to his right hip. In his right hand, he was tightly gripping a heavy, 2-foot-long iron crowbar. He wasn't wearing a police officer's hat or a badge, just a black baseball cap pulled down incredibly low, completely obscuring his eyes in deep shadow. This man was not a police officer. "Driver, step out of the vehicle immediately. Keep your hands where I can see them," he shouted. His voice didn't sound like a professional law enforcement officer. It was hoarse, raspy, filled with an erratic, unstable anger that sent an immediate jolt of pure terror straight down my spine. My cabin doors were currently unlocked because I'd been preparing to hand over my license. My survival instincts kicked in instantly. I lunged across the cabin, slamming the manual lock switches down on both the driver and passenger doors, just as the man reached the rear section of my truck. The very next second, I heard a heavy hand grab the external handle of my driver's side door, shaking it with violent metallic force. Clack, clack, clack. "Open the door. This is the police." I said, "Get out of the vehicle right now." The man screamed, his voice cracking with rage. When the door didn't budge, he raised the heavy iron crowbar and smashed it directly against the metal body of my cabin door. The impact echoed inside the small space like a gunshot, making me jump in my seat. "Show me your badge," I yelled back through the small gap in the window, my voice shaking uncontrollably as I tried to jam the key back into the ignition. "Show me your ID, or I'm not opening this door." Instead of replying, the man stepped back, raised the crowbar with both hands, and slammed it with terrifying force directly into my driver's side window. The thick glass shattered instantly into a dense spiderweb pattern. But thankfully, the heavy safety tint held the shards together, preventing it from completely collapsing into the cabin. He raised the crowbar again, preparing to strike the weakened glass a second time. I didn't hesitate for another second. I slammed my foot down on the clutch, jammed the gear shift into first, and floored the accelerator pedal to the floorboard. The heavy truck lunged forward, the rear tires spinning wildly on the frozen dirt shoulder, kicking up a massive cloud of dust and gravel before finally catching the solid asphalt of the highway. The sudden jerk caused the man to lose his balance, his crowbar glancing harmlessly off the side mirror as my truck surged away into the darkness. Through my side mirror, I watched in horror as the man sprinted back to his unmarked sedan with shocking speed. The red and blue emergency lights instantly vanished, replaced by a row of blindingly bright, aftermarket off-road LED light bars mounted on his bumper. He peeled out onto the empty highway, his tires smoking as he began pursuing me through the black desert plains. My box truck was incredibly heavy, fully loaded with cargo, and maxed out at about 75 miles per hour. His sedan was fast, agile, and closing the distance within seconds. I frantically grabbed my CB radio microphone, screaming for help on every single channel. But all I got back was a wall of cold, empty static. There were no cell towers out here. I looked down at my phone resting on the dashboard. 0 bars. I was entirely, completely on my own in the middle of a frozen wilderness. Within less than 2 minutes, the dark sedan pulled up right alongside my cabin, matching my speed exactly. The driver's side window of his car was rolled down completely. The man was steering the vehicle with his left hand, while holding a heavy, short-barreled black shotgun out the window with his right hand, aiming it directly through my shattered glass window at my face. His face was still shadowed under the cap, but I could see a manic, terrifying grin stretching across his lips. He was going to kill me, pull my truck over, and bury me out in the plains where nobody would ever find me. In that split second, I realized I had only one weapon: the sheer weight of my vehicle. I gripped the large steering wheel with both hands, gritted my teeth, and violently yanked the wheel hard to the left, swerving my massive box truck directly into his lane. There was a deafening, horrific crunch of tearing metal and shattering fiberglass as the heavy steel bumper of my truck slammed directly into the side doors of his sedan. The impact was massive. The sedan instantly lost traction on the icy asphalt, spinning completely out of control like a toy. It slid sideways off the highway at 80 miles per hour, hitting the deep, rocky ditch on the shoulder and rolling over 3 times in a chaotic explosion of sparks and broken glass before coming to a halt upside down in the pitch-black wilderness. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down to check if he was breathing. I kept my foot pinned flat against the floorboard for another 20 miles, my engine screaming in protest, until I finally saw the bright, beautiful neon lights of a massive 24-hour truck stop on the horizon. I blasted into the well-lit parking lot, slamming on my brakes, right next to a real state trooper car parked outside the main diner. When the actual state police investigated the crash site an hour later, they found the dark sedan completely abandoned. The vehicle had been reported stolen from a neighboring state 3 days prior, and the inverted trunk was filled with heavy chains, industrial duct tape, zip ties, and multiple hunting knives. The man had managed to crawl out of the broken windshield and escape into the empty plains. Before backup arrived, he was never identified or caught. The police told me that if I had stepped out of the truck at that initial stop, I would have been dead before my boots hit the gravel. Now, whenever I see flashing lights behind me on a dark, desolate highway, I don't care if it's a real cop or not. I do not stop until I reach a well-lit, heavily populated area. I am never pulling over in the dark again, because I know exactly what's waiting out there in the shadows of Highway 20.